a lot of abductions do take place outside of the body, and I think we're becoming much more aware now that this type of phenomena, it's not just isolated to one thing, and it's not just UAPs, and it's not just alien abduction, and it's not like Bigfoot and the Dogman and the cryptozoology and paranormal. It's all related, it's all joined together, it all fits, but and even with the demonic energies, with demon type energies. But some people just say, I'm sure you've heard this yourself, that the demons are the greys. They're not. The greys and the demons are two different types of beings. I think the entire human history is a deception. Our history is much more than what we've been led to believe, and almost certainly these type of beings have interfered in our spiritual evolution on this planet, and they continue to do so to this day. Just try to push it back, to stop us from being self-realized in who we are and where we come from and our great potential, in moving forward as a species, as an individual and a collective consciousness. A lot of the thing with the greys is, a lot of the time as well, they have a hive mind, so they have a collective consciousness. But human beings are quite unique in that we have an individual consciousness. We have a choice. I've been given information recently whilst outside of the body about the Earth and its creation, and I was told that this planet was created specifically by artificial intelligence, and this is the reason why it is considered to be a virtual reality playground. This planet is not the original Earth for humans. I have interactions with certain beings, that are human and more advanced, shall we say, spiritually. They inhabit the, what would be the fifth realm or casual plane. So very much like ascended masters or immortals, human immortals, if you were, or the archangels. So as it's being explained to me, this planet is not the original planet where humans were created on. Something happened, but apparently what I was told is that human beings, when they were seeded here, they were very, very powerful, very spiritually aware, and very close to the Creator. Whatever your take is on that, but and they had specific abilities, and these abilities were removed, and their conscious awareness of these abilities and who they were and where they come from was removed as well. But as time went on and human beings evolved in certain ways, that seed of knowledge or wisdom and who where we come from and our origins is still hidden. Perhaps this is again to do with the source code. It is something that they've been trying to find for a long time, but the source code is hidden inside each abductee. It's a source of information that is basically very much linked to the Creator and creation itself. It's information that they actually want. They've been trying to obtain it for centuries, but they've not been able to at the moment find it. But every abductee, whether they know this or not, has a source code, and it's almost like a genetic breakdown of how things were created. The Greys will tell you they created human beings. It's nonsense. They never did. But and it's also, the source code's very important to certain alphabet agencies for the information that it contains. But as I said, as I was told, outside of the body, we don't hide a very important secret in a place that is easily able to be found. It's hidden inside, not the body, but it's hidden inside, the soul, I've had contacts with, with the greys, with the shadow beings, with demonic energies. So, each one
I
of them
firmly
are.
believe that there is a connection in some form or fashion with the
Whoops.
alien phenomena.
I have
But
no
yeah,
idea what that was.
but yeah, but and also the thing is that, when people, it's also how you feel about them, your energy, if you feel fear, and you feel the energy is not good, obviously that's not going to be good for it's not going to be good for you, is it? It all depends again in determining what their intentions are towards you. If they're like the greys, the greys come in, for as an example, in the middle of the night, and they're taking you, they're taking a child.
Beyond the forbidden.
We're about to go woo. When I mean woo, we're about to go down some rabbit holes that we'll be talking about UFOs, entities, his past life, things that's happened to him, his encounters, supernatural beings, all kinds of crazy things that seem crazy, but is it really crazy? If you've been listening to this show for a while, I've had some pretty crazy things happen to me also in the past. But man, enough of me talking and rambling. Michael Cameron, my man, welcome to Beyond Forbidden. How you doing?
Hi there. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's a real honor to be here.
Yes, and today, a lot of people know me that my job requires me. I can listen to headphones, like the ones that go over the ears. That's my form of hearing protection.
Sure.
We're working in a noisy environment. So I listen to podcasts, audible books, talk radio all day long. So today, I probably listen to an 8-hour work day. I probably listen to 6 hours of your interviews.
Wow.
6 to 7. So try to get caught up a little bit. And I didn't have time by the time you sent me the file to read all of your book, but I did pretty good bit. I would say at least maybe half to 2/3, maybe close to half. But so you're gonna have people out there that's unfamiliar with you because you're kind of new on the scenes. This is, but you've been hitting the podcast scenes pretty good bit as of late, like I told you before the show. But go ahead and give everybody a background on you. Who is Michael Cameron? And all of that.
Well, I was born in London. I'm from the United Kingdom, born in London. I was raised in a strict Roman Catholic Irish family, in a strict Roman Catholic environment, brought up by priests and nuns of the Roman Catholic Church. But my first encounters, I guess, with the paranormal was when I grew up in a I grew up in the school grounds, and my childhood home was, it was owned by the Roman Catholic Church. My dad was a caretaker for the school. And in my book, the book focuses primarily on this actual house and the environment itself. So the school grounds and the school itself, where a lot of the paranormal and abduction related experiences happened to me. So I was brought up in the 1970s, and so in the house that I was in, I was actually an unexpected child. I was born premature, and I was in hospital for quite a long time. Um, I was actually I was brought up in the area of the infamous Jack the Ripper. This, the what would have been the serial killer. But in this house, when I come out of the hospital, basically, and was brought back to this house, a lot of strange occurrences began. So there was lots of cold spots in various parts of the house where there was previously none. Objects would move around, and vanish and then reappear. My mum, when she was in the house alone, she would often hear disembodied voices calling her name. And when she turned around, there was nobody there. You know, on the walls in the house, you know, they were very strong. You know, these are like, you know, like Victorian type houses. And if you were to hit the wall, you know, you would only get the sound of a thud. You know, but in the nighttime when my dad and mum used to go to bed and the lights went out, there was a really strange banging sound that was basically like an echo. You know, it would be like, well, as I say, like a stereo surround system now, that type of echoing. And when they went to investigate, there was nobody there, you know, and this used to go on for like literally weeks of this banging sound. And you know, I got three brothers that I mentioned in my book: Francis, Kevin, and Sean. Sean's 2 years older than me, and Francis and Kevin, they're a lot older than me and Sean. And you know, they had experiences where, when Francis was in bed once, you know, a really heavy oak wardrobe was pushed on top of him. You know, he wasn't hurt, but he was, you know, in shock. And another time, Kevin was coming up the stairs. He was pushed down the stairs by an unseen, you know, hand. He felt something move past him that seemed to be quite tall. And again, he felt, you know, he was pushed right down the stairs. And again, he wasn't hurt, but he was, you know, quite a little bit shook up over it, as you would be. And you know, when my parents told me later on, you know, that when I was in my cot, you know, they saw, they observed, you know, balls of light, or, you know, what would be, I guess now, orbs, moving around my cot, moving through the walls. And my brother as well, and my parents, they often observed an entity of some sort looking down at me in my cot. They said it was glowing, and when it was observed, it, you know, it vanished. So because it was a close-knit community, my dad, I guess my parents never done anything about it straight away. They didn't want people in the community to know, you know, because it was a really, you know, Roman Catholic environment. But because it was going on, and the activities began to get more menacing, you know, they reached out to the church, and a priest came and blessed the house, and the activity, you know, seemed to stop. So, you know, this was, I guess, and also when I was researching the book, I didn't know at the time, but when I was researching my book for location, you know, there is a lot of history in that area, and on the actual location of the house that I grew up in, you know, it was at one time a Roman burial ground for lepers. So in the area that I grew up in, it was, you know, a lot of it was on the Roman sites, Roman ground. You know,
you say
on one end,
you say burial ground for lepers, like people that died of leprosy.
Yeah, in Roman times.
Okay,
it was actually a cemetery underneath the house. And so, you know, so there was a lot of but the whole area that I grew up in. So, you know, on one part of, you know, if you went to the right of my house and you walked for 10 minutes, you'd hit central London. So then if you went the other way for about 10 to 15 minutes walk, you hit the Tower of London, you know, where the crown jewels are kept. So, you know, there's a lot of history in that area. And also during World War II, it was the area where the Blitz took place, where the Germans blew up pretty much most of London. And that area as well was basically, you know, demolished. So, you know, and, you know, when you, in the book, it talks more about that, about the history. So if you strip back the layers, there's more and more layers where, you know, this type of phenomena could have occurred because of what happened. Because it was, you know, a lot of violence, a lot of terrible things happened there.
Do you want to help support Beyond Forbidden and receive extra content that's not seen anywhere else? By becoming a patron, a few things you will receive are the full-length 90-minute or 120-minute podcast episode. Members will also receive a private link of the video podcast and will only be exclusive to Patreon members. In-person, face-to-face interviews with some of the most well-known, respected researchers behind the scenes footage of interviews not seen anywhere else, and that's just a few perks. So what do you have to lose? Cut out one brain-rotting, overly processed Happy Meal a month that doesn't do anything beneficial for your mind, body, and spirit, and become a Patreon for just $5. I bet. And how far are you from, what do you call it? Westminster Abbey or whatever it is? Or
from there,
back then?
I was quite a few miles away from there.
Why ask? Because that's where the palace is and all that, right? Because I like going down all different types of rabbit holes. I don't care how crazy it gets, but one thing I contemplated, because whenever you're taking notes for interviews and shows, you think about your mind, you brainstorm, you try to come up with some good questions, great questions, what the hell questions was that, just everything. But so I don't think I've ever asked it, but I did think about it one time.
Like
about the royals over there, and they're projecting like a type of signal, something deep beneath the palace. They're projecting, they have something to project a signal to keep people's frequencies down, So, and I don't know, I've heard stuff that kind of made me brainstorm that, but I know that's getting off topic. But and that's why there's a lot of craziness that's happened around that area and just England in general. But
I did have a friend who was in the Scottish Highlanders. He was in the British Army, and he actually worked for Prince Charles, who's now the King of England.
Really?
So he was brought up in a prominent Scottish Highland family, with their own crest, and he served in the British Army in the Scottish Highlanders, and he went eventually on to working at the palace, at Buckingham Palace, and he served with Prince Charles at the time, and also Lady Diana Spencer, and he knew a lot of things that happened at the palace, but
he didn't see no shape shifting or nothing like that.
Yeah, he did see some things, but obviously he was he'd sworn the Official Secrets Act. So,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And then you were at the time you had special branch that looked after the royals. So but I know that he knew a lot of stuff.
Oh, I would love to be a fly on the wall wherever he is having a conversation to, but
I remember one day though, I'll tell you this. I remember one day he took the royal car out with the flags on it, the official car. He took it for a drive and he crashed it into the back of a bus.
Oh shit.
And no one knew. The only people that knew were the Royal Military Police, the Red Caps in the British Army, and the civilian police, the Metropolitan Police. They all knew, because they all knew him. They all knew that he took the car out, but the Queen, she never knew nothing about it. And he actually was in central London and he crashed because he wasn't a good driver, you see. He took it out for he had some friends, you see, and he took them out to impress them, but he wasn't supposed to. You would get in trouble, really. But he took it for a spin and he was like trying to impress them. And he went into the back of this bus. And because all the windows are blacked out, but he had the royal flags on it. So people on the street, they thought the Queen was in the back, but she wasn't. So he had to take it then to one of the royal garages where he had to have it repaired and put back before anyone knew. But all the police there, the British, the Royal Military Police, they all knew that he'd done this, but they covered for him.
Man, that's crazy.
He would have went to the Tower of London.
Yes, I know, right? But man, so after watching some of your interviews, Michael, and
sure,
and after hundreds of interviews I've conducted throughout the years since 2010, one thing I have learned to spot with certain people that I have on the show is noticing and not identifying with trauma. And it also helps to have a wife that's a psych nurse. I mentioned this many a times on the show. She's a psych nurse and she trains, and she she trains to spot certain characteristics of individuals, and
Sure.
I always try to pick her brain, just, either about myself, like, well, just whatever it is, about anything and everything. Um, I have a fascination with the mind, and just picking out things. So, but one thing I've noticed, Michael, after listening to some of your interviews, like I listened to a bunch of them today, but one thing I noticed, I watched a few yesterday, or one yesterday, but one thing I noticed is that you have been through a lot of shit. You've been through a lot of trauma, and I feel like that definitely adds to your credibility.
Thank you. Yeah, I have complex PTSD, so I was diagnosed with that last year. Which is, it's multiple abuse over a period of time that's not being, it's below the surface, basically, through fractured memories. But in the book it talks about other subjects as well, which some people feel are unrelated to the topic, but in book 2 I'll explain the reason why I put them in.
And people that are listening and or watching, we're about to start getting into some really bizarre whatever you call it, experiences, stories, whatever, from Michael. Some things that just, you would just say, what the hell? Which I've had some crazy, and I might share one late within this interview, but depends on when it fits into the, with the discussion. But so first off, I guess I know this next question may be sensitive, Michael. But do you think that with all the trauma and experiences that you have had, that, with being with abductions, with outer body, abductions also, like poltergeists, just supernatural entities, everything. Do you think that your parents were part of some clandestine secret group? Possibly. Like, I don't mean that they meant anything nefarious or malevolent, the reason why I asked that, because well, if they were a part of some group or whatever, out there to conduct some certain types of experiments on you, rather physical or psychological experiments. You have mentioned in the book, also in your interviews, that your parents were very secret in nature, and that you always felt like they were keeping something hidden from you. So it just strikes my curiosity, were they just like with Eisenhower, the treaty with aliens and like that over here in the States,
Yeah.
do you think, I know that's speculation because I doubt you have proof, do you think that it's possible that you were part of this election process, and they, maybe some people came to them, and maybe that's how you kind of got brought into the scenes with all this craziness that we'll be talking about?
Well, you know what? Often, as you know, I'm sure, but often with, especially with alien abduction, often there is somebody in their family that is in the military. Normally in the US, it's normally the US Navy, the Department of Defense, Navy Intelligence, or certainly somebody who's worked in the, like something like the skunk works. They've worked with this type of technology. But for me, as I explained, my dad was served during World War II as a flight engineer. He was a Grand Knights Templar.
That's what made me kind of think of that, Michael, is because, whenever I heard you mention that before.
Yeah. So when I was growing up, most of the people in my household that I would have interactions with would be, I guess, 3 types of people. There would be Roman Catholics, cardinals, high-ranking members of the Roman Catholic Church of Rome. My dad had, even though he was like a schoolkeeper, there was a lot more to him than that. That there was more going on in the background. So he was high-ranking police officers, detectives, what would be ACPO, which was people like Association of Chief Police Officers. They were the top, and they were all Freemasons, and military personnel. So there was a lot of military people around me as a child growing up. So that's why I'm quite familiar with the police. I'm quite okay with the police and with the military. It's familiar to me. In actual fact, most of the people I've ever got on well with were in the police and in the military. I just, and throughout my life, I've always come into contact people that are in the police or in the military, no matter what I've done. And I've also had, some unusual job proposals in the past. I worked for a military contractor. The same military contractor that I later learned was actually the that supplied the Area 51 base with the cameo dudes. The military contractors, that guard the perimeter of the Area 51. So I worked for a contractor that actually that supplied those military personnel to that base. I didn't know at the time, but I was an undercover surveillance operative that worked alongside the police doing undercover work, targeting violent criminals in London. And I'd done this for a little while, but then I left. But my mum as well, during World War II, she built Lancaster bombers. So she worked in munitions factories, and she built bombs and ammunition but because she was very intelligent. I mean, it's not a big deal nowadays, but during the war, because she was very intelligent, she was taken off the shop floor and made a supervisor. In the time, it was just men in the offices doing that work, but she was brought upstairs and promoted, really, because she, her skills, they said, were more warranted doing what they were doing, I guess. But I know that my mum was an abductee as well, because she had experiences with what I believe now could be what we know now as the Greys. Back then, it's she wouldn't have known what they were, I don't think. And my dad did have paranormal experiences, but he was more of a nuts and bolts type of guy, I guess, as far as I know, anyway. But I did have, many of my uncles, they served in the military. One of my uncles, he served in Africa during the war in a role of the special forces. And I had uncles who were in the Navy. So so there was military in the family from that side of it.
So I've heard one thing with your mother. You say she worked with munitions and things like that during the war. What year was she born?
I don't know the year. I don't know. As I explain in my book, I know very little about my parents. I don't even have any photos of them. And there is a little bit of a something to do with that as well, because when I was born, apparently my two older brothers, were told never to speak about my birth.
One thing that I think of, and I've also talked about recently with another guest, is and I've talked about it before in the past, or looked into it. Because first off, how much older are your two older brothers than you?
By about 20 years.
So that's pretty big gap. What I'm saying is, and I know a lot of these things can be sensitive, but you wrote the book to try to, it's a form of, and also doing these interviews is a form of healing, also. But do you think that maybe you might be, because everybody listening, we will be getting into more of his stories with his book, High Strangeness, a Lifetime of Alien and Paranormal Encounters. But I have to ask you, do you think that maybe you are a hybrid? Maybe because there's a big gap between, I wouldn't, with your mother, I would say if she had you, she had it been older. I'm not saying she can't have a child at all, but you doing this research, and for years, you hear of babies getting dropped off at doorsteps. You hear of orphanages, and I just interviewed a lady, and I mentioned, she brought up orphan trains or something like that, Cabbage Patch Kids or whatever. Sure. And then I brought up something I've been thinking about, the integration process, like Dr. David Jacobs talks about. What better way to integrate society, with alien genetics than to, because back then orphanages were huge. Babies were being dropped off at doorsteps all the time, up into the, not that long ago. And I'm sure it still happens. You just don't hear about it. And orphan trains and these Cabbage Patch Kids stories, which is real strange. What were they doing? Like, were these byproducts of women that got abducted and they stole the embryos onto the ships and they genetically grew these Cabbage Patch Kids or whatever? I don't know. And they dropped them off at society in orphanages, the doorsteps of people. And do you think, I know it's crazy, but do you think you might be one? You know what I mean?
I don't think anything's crazy in our fields.
I know, right? I know.
I think that's quite normal for us.
Why I ask is because you're still trying to get your head around this. You still have a lot of your books for that fascinating. Your interviews are also, but there's a lot of unanswered questions too, especially with your family.
Yeah, there is, yeah.
So it made me think.
I mean, it's interesting you should say that, because there is something along those lines that I've never spoken about, which is, I don't think my parents are my parents.
I noticed that I listened past couple of days. I probably don't listen, like I said, altogether about 10 hours, 6-7 hours a day. And then a couple hours yesterday. I don't think I heard anybody ask you about that.
I asked, I mean, I've not seen my brothers for decades. So, I mean, with Sean, who I talk about, is 2 years older than me. We don't get on. I'm not sure, as I tried to explain in my book, I'm not sure if it's because of the experiences I had and we had together, or, it's just siblings being siblings. But I did say to one of them when I contacted them not long ago that, can you tell me anything about my birth? And he said to me, we're not allowed to talk about that.
Huh.
And I said, why not? And he said, we were told never to speak about your birth. And I said, well, you can now, because we're adults, and he said, I'm not going to tell you anything. And I said, because I don't think my parents are my parents. And I said, is that true? And he just says, we can't say, well, why can't you say? So there is, there is this thing about, whether I am or not. I don't feel that I am. I haven't felt that for a long time. So, it's, it's difficult because you don't know really where you come from.
Man, and that's got to be part of that trauma also, and I hate to ask some of these tough questions, but I know you obviously wanted to talk about it, or you would have never wrote a book, but I know, go ahead.
I appreciate the questions anyway. I don't shy away. I mean, if I can answer any questions that people ask me, I do. If I don't know the answer, I can't give one. I always say that as well. So I'm very straightforward, and I mean, I'm very easy to get along with.
I just noticed that your mother, I can see your parents being the biological, and I hate even talk because I don't know how to go about saying it, but because I don't know how I'd react, but I could see your two older half brothers that are 20 years older than you being, from your mother, if she worked during World War II, because during World War II, then I would assume she was probably, I don't think you're that old, like, may I ask what your age is?
I'm 55.
So I
But,
don't know the math, but she would have had to been older, which is possible for sure, but I don't know. That was something I was wanting to ask you, because I've been doing a lot of thinking about the babies being dropped off at doorsteps, orphanages. Are they just all byproducts of kids that didn't have any parents, or parents that couldn't take care of their kids, or kids in orphanages that lost parents during wars, or what's up with the Cabbage Patch Kids? And then we hear orphan trains and repopulation centers, or repopulation of the West here in the United States. And just then you start thinking about Dr. David Jacobs' work with abductions, with integration, with hybrids and things like that. Then what better way to go stealth mode with integration, than orphanages, but I don't know, still kind of looking into that. But where would you like to start? I know we kind of warming up to it, but where would you like to start, Michael?
Anywhere you like. If you continue to ask me questions, it's better for me if you do that.
Let's kind of go back then. When did all this start? Well, I think I heard you say age 4 or 5 or something like that.
Yeah, you often find though with abductees, they often tell you that it's around 4. Funny enough, the ages seems to be for everyone. In the UK, in the United States, a lot of abductees often say it's from the age of 4. But yeah, mine happened, with Sean. We had what would be now known, as a classical daylight disc, encounter. When we were living in the school, we come out. I remember being a hot summer holiday. The school was closed. My dad had been in the school at the time, with the cleaners, because they're still looking after the school for, getting it ready for when it opens after the 6-week holiday. And me and Sean were outside playing on the grass, which was just adjacent to what would be the kitchen of our house. And we were having to kick a ball, playing football, or I guess soccer, in the United States terminology. We're kicking the ball around, and, Sean then said to me, why don't we go and take a walk, around the school grounds? So, Sean picked up the ball and we went down this grassy, slopey hill that was there. And, we walked around the school to where the large school hall was, like the gymnasium. So there was 2 concrete stone platforms, raised up. So there was a staircase on one, and then he went up to another staircase. And Sean went up onto the first platform, and I was actually at the bottom of it. I remember looking at red fire ants. Funny enough, I was just, crouched down looking at them. And it was then at some point that I heard Sean say, what is it? What is it? What is that? And I looked around, and I walked towards where he was, and he was pointing up at the sky at something. And when I looked in the direction of his finger, basically, I could see this, shiny object which was moving around the sky, in between. There was only a few clouds in the sky. And, I guess it was the sun was reflecting off its metal. But it was, a classical disc-shaped craft. I mean, during the 1970s, we didn't have any, anything like that, really. We didn't see anything like that. So there was nothing, if people asked, there was nothing that could influence what we see or anything. As I explained, in the 1970s in the UK, the channels on the TV were only 3 channels. um, and the children often acted as the remote control for the parents, turning it, otherwise we used to get a clip around the ear if we didn't do it. And as I explained as well, even with the TV, we wasn't allowed, me and Sean, we wasn't allowed to watch TV unless the parents and mum and dad was with us, and there was nothing on the TV anyway during the 70s that could influence anything we see or any encounters we had. And as I say, most of the time we were, because it was a Roman Catholic church, we were at the church a lot of the time. And when we wasn't, we were doing homework or we were in the school doing stuff. So, we didn't have a lot of time for anything else. But yeah, we saw this craft. And the odd thing was as well is in that area of London where I was, it was a really busy, area of London. So there's lots of activity. It's a weekday. There's lots of activity going on around us. There was lots of, warehouses. They were unloading and loading up lorries. There was a really busy police station that's still there to this day, where there was lots of police cars that used to come in and out with their sirens and lights blaring going up and down the road. And so, I wonder, I've often wondered if anyone else see this, what me and Sean observed, this metallic saucer type disc-like craft in the sky, over London. So, I'm wondering if anyone else see it. But the thing is that when we were looking at the craft, both of us entered an altered state of consciousness, I would say now, where the environment around us suddenly went quiet. And it's like what, as I explained in the book, it's what the British investigative researcher at the time, Jenny Randalls, who coined the phrase the Oz factor when she explained, the location sometimes with paranormal activity or sightings of craft. The immediate environment seems to change somewhat. So all sounds around you will suddenly become quiet, or there'll be some sort of change to the environment as well. But when we were in this state of altered state, it seemed like we experienced missing time, because when I come out from this altered state of consciousness first, and I felt disorientated. It's almost like when you're being awoken from walking in your sleep, sleepwalking, and suddenly someone wakes you up and you're not sure where you are. And I felt also very afraid, like something had happened. I couldn't explain what it was. And Sean was the same, but Sean came out of his a little bit later. When I looked across at him, he was almost like in a zombie-like state. And when I looked at the sky, this object had disappeared, it'd gone. But when I called out to Sean, he gradually come back to, to this reality, I guess. And but at the time, I felt I wanted to get away. I needed to get away from this area. And I just started to run back to, to the house where I knew my dad was at the time. He was having a break. He was with my mum in the kitchen, having a bite to eat before going back to work. And Sean followed. But I remember that when we were running back to the house, we were looking at the sky, scanning the sky for this object, looking up, but we couldn't see it. And I remember we rushed back into the house, and because we run through the door very quickly, we sort of startled our mum, scared my mum, and Dad had he had a go at us for scaring mum. So and we told him what had happened, but the reaction is that it's okay, just go back to playing on the field next to the house, just be in sight where we can see you, but that's all that was said. But years later, I asked Kevin, one of my older brothers, and he said it was still spoken about this, what we'd see, and what had happened. So that was the beginning, really, and that one was with Sean.
And I believe this is from the same experience from that you're speaking of, chapter 4 of your book. Daylight Saucer, I believe.
That was it, yeah.
You said, quote, whilst preparing this narrative, I asked Sean if he could recall this encounter pertaining to the sorcerer from our childhood. And he said he could. I
Yeah.
could not help wondering over the years he had revisited this memory and did not believe it had taken place until many years later. When he asked the question, by the only person who could ask him, his younger brother, who was with him on that day. So, do you think that Sean, do you think that he remembers all these memories of these things that happened when y'all were younger, but he just tries to bury it deep down inside?
Well, I did have an opportunity. You see, I've not seen Sean for a long, long time, but I had an opportunity because somebody passed in, on the, one of the cousins in the family, and I had an opportunity to speak to him. Obviously, I wanted to ask him if I could put his name in the book, and he said I could, um, and um, and I asked him, about that, and I asked him about a few other experiences, and he said he remembered them, and that times he did think, did he just imagine it? But when I started to talk about it, he knew, he remembered. But I think, you know um I think Sean experienced trauma as well as a child, and very much so as a teenager. And he got into trouble quite a lot with the police, and he acted up, and he was drinking a lot, and sometimes I do wonder if it was because of those experiences that he had. And as I explain in the book, I went on to have more and more and more, and I continue to do so to this day. But I don't know if Sean did, because we stopped our relationship sort of. It changed, and so I don't know. And I often say that on podcasts. I don't know if it continued for Sean, because we didn't speak.
What you mentioned a while ago about the Oz factor. You briefly explained a little bit, but can you go a little bit more in detail about the Oz factor for those who are unfamiliar with it? I'm sure people are familiar, they just haven't really heard the term.
Yeah. As I said, it was coined by the British investigative researcher Jenny Randalls, and she was at one time the director of Bufora in the UK, which is the equivalent of MUFON in the US. It was her that coined. It was her that coined this particular phrase. It's taken from the Wizard of Oz, where she says that some people are able to experience, some people are able to experience this type of phenomena, whilst other people do not. And for some reason, it seems that they entered into this type of altered state of consciousness, where it's like somebody could be standing next to you, and you could be looking at something in the sky, like at a UAP or UFO, depending on what phrase you prefer to use. And you could be standing in a group of 10 people, maybe two of those out of that 10 people will see these craft, whilst the other 8 people won't see it. So she's explained that it's, for some reason some people are excluded from seeing from seeing that craft, or or having experiences with this particular type of phenomenon. So, and often with the Oz factor as well, it seems to be like if you're out in the in the woods or in the forests and something happens, it normally the wildlife in the immediate environment you're in seems to suddenly go quiet, or if there's cars along the highway, normally, if there's a lot of traffic normally on a particular road, normally it suddenly vanishes, like it suddenly stops.
It's kind of like the observer effect.
Yeah.
Also, it's just like, the saying, just because if a tree falls, if a tree falls in the forest, you won't
Sure.
hear it. You won't hear it.
No,
But
no.
but did it make a sound or did it not make a sound? It's the observer that depicts, I see what you're saying. And let me pull another quote. Oh, if you have something to go ahead and say, Michael.
Yeah. I was just going to say, it does, this type of phenomena though does seem to happen a lot around, when people have sightings of these craft, or very much so when you have abductees that are being taken from the roadside, in cars. This type of silence effect seems to be quite prevalent in those times. So perhaps it's to do with the frequency that these craft give off, but something to do with the propulsion system that affects the environment. I think it could be that.
And I pulled this from chapter 3, Invisible Friends.
Sure.
You said, quote, "I did not have to wait long because one of my friends suddenly appeared in front of me. I looked up at him and he gazed down at me, smiling. He was wearing the same tight-fitting uniform as before. The outfit looked as though it had just been removed from its packaging. Time stood still that day as I looked into his eyes. I felt like the walls had fallen away and all external sounds no longer existed outside the room. His mind was communicating with mine. I later learned this phenomenon was called the Oz factor." And go on to say, his eyes held me in a trance like state, and I could recall nodding my head as his words vibrated inside my head. Much later in my life, I felt that this being had not been addressing the outer visible me, but instead an unidentified aspect of me he knew on another level. And this part of me had been transferring data to him. Suddenly I was jolted out from wherever I had been, and for a moment I was disoriented, confused and shaking. Man, that's wild. Is this whenever was this the first abduction that you went through?
Do you want to help support Beyond Forbidden and receive extra content that's not seen anywhere else? By becoming a patron, a few things you will receive are the full-length 90-minute or 120-minute podcast episode. Members will also receive a private link to the video podcast and will only be exclusive to Patreon members. In-person, face-to-face interviews with some of the most well-known, respected researchers. Behind-the-scenes footage of interviews not seen anywhere else. And that's just a few perks. So what do you have to lose? Cut out one brain-rotting, overly processed Happy Meal a month that doesn't do anything beneficial for your mind, body, and spirit, and become a Patreon for just $5.